The moment Ophelia Reeves saw her husband's lifeless body sprawled across the dusty floor of their mercantile store, she knew her life would never be the same. But she could not have imagined that the law itself would become her prison. It was June 1881 in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and the scorching sun beat down mercilessly on the rough wooden buildings that lined the main street. Her husband Marcus had been 47 years old when he died, struck down by what the town doctor called a sudden affliction of the heart. Ophelia was 24, and in the eyes of the law, everything that had been hers to help build now belonged to Marcus's brother, Edmund Reeves. The funeral had been a blur of black fabric and hollow condolences. People she had served in the store for 3 years suddenly looked at her with pity mixed with something else, something that made her skin crawl. Edmund had arrived from Kansas City within a week, his expensive suit and polished shoes marking him as a man who had done well for himself in banking. He was nothing like Marcus, who had been kind despite their arranged marriage, who had treated Ophelia with respect even though she had come to him as a mail-order bride with nothing to her name. Edmund stood in the store now, just 2 weeks after the funeral, his cold gray eyes assessing everything with the practiced gaze of someone calculating value. Ophelia watched him from behind the counter, her hands trembling slightly as she folded a bolt of calico fabric. "You have done an adequate job keeping the place running," Edmund said without looking at her. "But I will be making significant changes. This building could fetch a good price, and the inventory as well." "This store is all I have," Ophelia said quietly, hating how small her voice sounded. "I helped build this business. Marcus and I worked together every single day." Edmund finally turned to face her, and there was no warmth in his expression. "My dear sister-in-law, you seem to be under a misapprehension about your circumstances. Under territorial law, as Marcus's widow with no children, you have no claim to this property. As his only living blood relative, everything passes to me. You are entitled to 1/3 of the personal property for your support, but the business, the building, and all attached assets belong to me now." Ophelia felt the blood drain from her face. 1/3 of personal property? That would barely be enough to live on for a few months. "Then I suggest you find employment or seek another husband," Edmund replied coldly. "I am not an unreasonable man. You may remain in the living quarters above the store for 30 days while you make arrangements." 30 days? Ophelia's voice rose despite her best efforts to remain calm. "Where am I supposed to go? I have no family, no one to turn to." Edmund's smile was thin and calculating. "Actually, I have a proposal that might solve both our problems. You are still young and presentable. I am a widower myself. If you were to agree to become my wife, you could remain here, and we would consolidate the family holdings." The suggestion made Ophelia's stomach turn. She had seen the way Edmund looked at her, like she was another asset to be acquired. "I am still in mourning for your brother. Marcus has been dead 2 weeks. You cannot afford the luxury of a long mourning period." Edmund stepped closer, and Ophelia instinctively moved back. "Think about it carefully, my dear. Your options are quite limited. Without means or family, a woman alone faces a very difficult existence. I am offering you security." "I need time to consider," Ophelia managed to say, though every fiber of her being wanted to scream refusal. "You have until the end of the month," Edmund said. "After that, if you have not agreed to my proposal, you will need to vacate these premises. I have already spoken with Judge Harrison about the matter. Everything is quite legal and proper." After Edmund left, Ophelia sank onto a wooden stool, her mind racing. She had come west 3 years ago, fleeing poverty in Philadelphia, answering an advertisement for a bride. Marcus had been honest in his letters, telling her he was older, that he wanted a wife to help with his business, and perhaps provide companionship in his later years. It had not been a love match, but it had been kind. He had taught her the mercantile trade, treated her as a partner, and never raised a hand to her. She had been content, perhaps even happy in her own way. Now she was trapped. She had asked around town already discreetly about her legal standing. The answer had been the same everywhere. Without children, without male relatives of her own, she had no real claim to what she had helped build. The law saw her as a temporary caretaker of her husband's property, until it could be properly passed to his blood kin. And if she refused Edmund's proposal, she would have almost nothing. The bell above the store door chimed, and Ophelia quickly composed herself, wiping at her eyes. A tall man entered, and she recognized him immediately, even though she had only seen him a handful of times. Harrison York was a cowboy who worked at the Triple Star Ranch about 15 miles outside of town. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His eyes were a startling shade of blue-green that seemed to miss nothing. "Madam," he said, removing his dusty hat politely, I am real sorry about your husband. Marcus was always fair in his dealings." "Thank you," Ophelia said softly. "What can I help you with today?" "Need some supplies for the ranch. Boss sent me in with a list." He pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his vest pocket. "Also wanted to settle our account. Marcus always extended us credit during the lean months." Ophelia took the list, grateful for something practical to focus on. As she gathered the items, coffee, flour, beans, tobacco, ammunition, she was aware of Harrison watching her with a concerned expression. "If you do not mind me saying, madam, you look like you have had more than grief weighing on you," he said carefully. "Is Edmund Reeves giving you trouble?" Ophelia's hand stilled on a bag of flour. "You know Edmund?" "I know of him. Word travels in a town this size. People are talking about how he has claimed everything, how he is pushing you out." Harrison's jaw tightened. "Does not sit right with a lot of folks." "The law is on his side," Ophelia said bitterly. "No matter how wrong it feels, everything was in Marcus's name. I was just his wife." Harrison was quiet for a moment, then said, "There might be another way." Ophelia looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "I have a friend, Nathan Creek. He is an attorney in Wichita, Kansas. He helped my sister once when her husband died, and his family tried to take her farm. There are provisions in the law, things most people do not know about. Would you be willing to talk to him?" Hope flared in Ophelia's chest. Dangerous and fragile. "An attorney would cost money I do not have." "Let me wire Nathan, explain the situation. He is a good man. He might take the case for a portion of what you recover or work out payments." Harrison's eyes were earnest. "At least let him look at your situation. You deserve better than being forced into a marriage you do not want or thrown out with nothing." "Why would you help me?" Ophelia asked, suspicious despite her desperation. "You barely know me." Harrison considered the question seriously. "Because what is happening to you is not right. Because I saw how hard you and Marcus worked together. And because I know what it is like to feel powerless against the law." He paused, then added quietly, "My mother was Creek Nation. When she died, the government tried to take everything she left me because I was mixed blood. Nathan helped me fight that, so I know sometimes the law can be twisted to help instead of hurt." Ophelia studied his face, searching for any sign of deception or ulterior motive. She saw only genuine concern and a quiet determination. "I would be grateful for any help," she finally said, "but I only have 30 days before Edmund expects an answer to his proposal and evicts me from the living quarters. Then I will ride to Wichita myself tomorrow. It is a hard 2 days' ride, but faster than waiting for telegraph exchanges." Harrison gathered his supplies and paid his account in full, counting out careful coins. "Do not agree to anything until I get back. Can you stall him?" "I will try," Ophelia promised, feeling the first stirring of hope since Marcus's death. Harrison tipped his hat to her. "I will be back as soon as I can, madam. You hang on." After he left, Ophelia returned to her work, but her mind was churning. She knew she was taking a risk trusting a man she barely knew, but what choice did she have? Edmund's proposal made her skin crawl, and the thought of being destitute terrified her. At least Harrison was offering her a chance to fight. The next 3 days passed with agonizing slowness. Edmund came by the store twice, each time asking about her decision with increasing impatience. Ophelia deflected, saying she needed more time to grieve properly, that rushing into another marriage felt disrespectful to Marcus's memory. Edmund was not pleased, but social convention was on her side for the moment. A woman in mourning could not be pressured too openly without causing scandal. On the 4th day after Harrison's departure, Ophelia was sweeping the store's front porch when she saw two riders approaching from the north. Her heart leapt when she recognized Harrison's distinctive gray horse. The man riding beside him was older, perhaps 40, dressed more formally in dark trousers and a vest despite the heat. He had intelligent eyes and carried himself with quiet authority. They dismounted, and Harrison made the introductions. "Mrs. Reeves, this is Nathan Creek. Nathan, this is Ophelia Reeves." Nathan removed his hat and shook her hand firmly. "Mrs. Reeves, Harrison has explained your situation. I have been reviewing Oklahoma territorial law during the ride. May we speak somewhere private?" Ophelia led them up the outside stairs to the living quarters above the store. The rooms were modest but clean, and she quickly prepared coffee while the two men settled at her small kitchen table. Her hands shook slightly as she poured, partly from nerves and partly from exhaustion. She had barely slept since Edmund's ultimatum. Nathan pulled out a leather document case and extracted several papers. "Let me be direct about your legal position. Under current Oklahoma territorial law, as a widow without children, you are indeed entitled to only 1/3 of the personal property, while real property and business assets pass to the nearest blood relative. In this case, Edmund Reeves." Ophelia's heart sank. "So there is nothing to be done?" "I did not say that." Nathan's expression was serious but not unkind. "Harrison mentioned that you contributed significantly to building this business. Did you work in the store?" "Every single day since I arrived, I kept the books, managed inventory, dealt with suppliers, served customers. Marcus taught me everything about running a mercantile." "Did your husband ever acknowledge your contribution in writing? Letters, diary entries, anything?" Ophelia thought hard. "He wrote letters to suppliers, sometimes mentioning our decisions, and he kept a journal." Her eyes widened. "The journal is still upstairs in our bedroom. Edmund has not been through the personal items yet." "Get it," Nathan said immediately. "Any documentation that shows you as a business partner rather than just a wife could be crucial." Ophelia hurried to the bedroom and retrieved the leather-bound journal from Marcus's nightstand. She had not been able to bring herself to read it since his death, but now she handed it to Nathan with trembling fingers. Nathan paged through carefully, his expression growing more intent. "Listen to this entry from 8 months ago. Ophelia has proven herself invaluable to the success of our enterprise. Her head for numbers surpasses my own, and her instinct for what goods will sell has increased our profits considerably. I should formalize her position, but I fear my brother would disapprove of such an unorthodox arrangement." He looked up. "There are dozens of entries like this documenting your role as essential to the business operations, Kurt." "How does that help legally?" Ophelia asked, hardly daring to hope. "There is a provision in territorial law, rarely used but valid, that recognizes business partnerships even within a marriage when both parties contribute materially to the enterprise. If I can demonstrate that you were effectively a business partner, not merely a wife assisting her husband, you could claim partnership rights to the business assets." Nathan set down the journal. "It would require arguing before a judge, and it is not guaranteed to succeed. But based on these journal entries, and if we can gather testimony from townspeople about your role, we have a legitimate case." Harrison leaned forward. "What about the building itself?" "That is more complicated. Real property laws are less flexible. But if Mrs. Reeves can establish partnership in the business, she could potentially force Edmund to buy out her share, or sell the business and split the proceeds." Nathan looked at Ophelia seriously. "I must be honest with you. This will not be easy or quick. Judge Harrison in this town is by the book, which could work for or against us, and Edmund will not surrender his claim without a fight." "I will fight," Ophelia said fiercely. "I have nothing left to lose. If I do not fight, I either become Edmund's wife, which I absolutely refuse, or I leave with almost nothing. At least this way I have a chance." "There is one more thing," Nathan said carefully. "Edmund could make your life very difficult while this case proceeds. He technically owns the building and could evict you before we get a hearing." "How long until we could get before the judge?" the Harrison asked. "At least 2 weeks, possibly 3. Judge Harrison rides a circuit, and he is not due back in Tulsa until the 23rd of this month. That is 16 days from now." Ophelia did quick calculations. Edmund gave me until the end of this month, which is 25 days away. If the judge is not here until the 23rd, and then we need a hearing, you will need to stall Edmund, Nathan confirmed. Make him think you are considering his proposal. We cannot afford for him to evict you before we can present our case. The thought of deceiving Edmund, even for good reason, made Ophelia uncomfortable, but the alternative was worse. I will do what I must. Over the next hour, Nathan took detailed notes about her marriage, her work in the store, her contributions to business decisions. Harrison sat quietly, occasionally interjecting with observations about the store's reputation, or things he had heard Marcus say about Ophelia's role. His presence was steadying, and Ophelia found herself grateful for his solid, reassuring demeanor. When they finished, Nathan repacked his documents. I will stay in Tulsa and begin gathering depositions from townspeople. Harrison, you should return to the ranch before your boss thinks you have abandoned your post. Harrison stood but looked at Ophelia with concern. Will you be all right? I will manage, she said more confidently than she felt. Thank you for bringing Mr. Creek here. I cannot repay you for this. No repayment needed, Harrison said simply. Just see justice done. After they left, Ophelia returned to the store, her mind whirling with this new development. For the first time since Marcus's death, she felt like she had some agency, some control over her fate. It was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. Edmund arrived that afternoon, his timing unfortunate. He found Ophelia reorganizing shelves, and his expression was displeased. You have had nearly a week to consider my proposal. I require an answer. Ophelia set down the canned goods she was holding and turned to face him, choosing her words carefully. I have been considering it seriously, but Edmund, you must understand this is difficult for me. I cared for your brother, and the thought of marrying again so soon. Sentiment is a luxury you cannot afford, Edmund interrupted. However, I suppose I can appreciate the impropriety of appearing too hasty. What if we were to announce an engagement but wait 6 months before the actual marriage? That would satisfy social convention. The suggestion made Ophelia's situation both better and worse. It bought her time, but it also committed her to a path she desperately wanted to avoid. Still, she needed Edmund complacent until the hearing. That seems more reasonable, she said slowly. Could we perhaps discuss the terms? I would want to remain involved in the store's operation. Edmund's expression softened slightly, clearly pleased that she seemed to be agreeing. We can discuss such details after the engagement is formalized. For now, I simply need your agreement in principle. May I have until the end of the week? Ophelia asked. I would like to write to a friend in Philadelphia. Let her know of my plans. It seems only proper. Edmund studied her for a moment, then nodded. Very well, until Saturday. But I will require a firm commitment then, Ophelia. I am not a patient man, and I have business interests in Kansas City that need attending. After he left, Ophelia felt sick with anxiety. She was playing a dangerous game, and if Edmund discovered her deception before the hearing, there was no telling what he might do. That evening, there was a knock on the door to her living quarters. Ophelia opened it cautiously to find Harrison standing there, hat in hand. I hope I'm not disturbing you, he said. I wanted to make sure Edmund did not cause you trouble today. I saw him leaving the store earlier. Come in, Ophelia said, stepping aside. Would you like coffee? If it is not too much trouble. They settled in the small sitting room, and Ophelia found herself relaxing in Harrison's presence. There was something inherently calming about him, a steadiness that made her feel less alone. Edmund wants an answer by Saturday, she told him. I managed to put him off, but I had to imply I was considering his proposal seriously. Harrison's jaw tightened. You should not have to play such games. I will do what I must to keep a roof over my head until the hearing. Ophelia sipped her coffee. Mr. Creek seems confident we have a case. Nathan is the best attorney I know. If anyone can find a legal path forward, it is him. Harrison paused, then said, I have been thinking about your situation. If things get difficult, if Edmund tries to evict you before the hearing, you could come stay at the Triple Star. The ranch owner's wife, Mrs. Catherine Morrison, she is a good woman. She would take you in. I could not impose like that, Ophelia protested. It would not be an imposition, and it would keep you safe. Harrison's eyes were serious. I do not trust Edmund Reeves. Men like him who view everything and everyone as property to be acquired, they do not react well when things do not go their way. You barely know me, Ophelia said softly. Why are you doing all this? Harrison was quiet for a long moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. When I first came to Tulsa about 4 years ago, I was running from trouble in Texas. Mixed blood, in case you could not tell. And that made me a target for men who did not like Indians and did not accept half-breeds either. I had nothing. No prospects, just a horse and a gun. Marcus gave me credit at this store when no one else would. Said he could see I was honest and trying to make an honest living. That credit kept me fed until I got my first pay from the ranch. He looked up, meeting her eyes. Your husband was kind to me when he did not have to be, and I have watched you in this store over the years, seen how hard you work, how fairly you treat people. What is happening to you is not right, and I have the means to help, so I will. Ophelia felt tears sting her eyes. Marcus was a good man. I wish I could have loved him the way a wife should love a husband, but I cared for him deeply. That is more than many marriages have, Harrison said gently, and he knew it. I could see it in how he looked at you, like he was grateful every day that you chose to stay. They talked for another hour, and Ophelia found herself sharing more than she had intended, about growing up poor in Philadelphia, watching her mother work herself to death in a textile factory, about answering the bride advertisement out of desperation and hope, about the strange mix of relief and guilt she felt at her freedom now, terrible as the circumstances were. Harrison listened without judgment, occasionally sharing bits of his own story. His white father had abandoned his Creek mother when Harrison was young. He had grown up between two worlds, never quite fitting in either. The ranch had given him a place, but he still felt that restlessness, that sense of not quite belonging. When Harrison finally left, Ophelia realized she felt better than she had in weeks. Not happy exactly, but less alone, less afraid. She went to bed that night with a strange flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with her legal troubles. The next few days were a blur of activity. Nathan Creek interviewed townspeople, gathering statements about Ophelia's role in the store. The responses were overwhelmingly supportive. The banker confirmed that Ophelia had been handling the store's accounts for over a year. Suppliers testified that they had dealt with her directly on orders and payments. Customers spoke of her knowledge and business acumen. Edmund grew increasingly suspicious of Nathan's presence in town, but the attorney was careful never to reveal his purpose. He told anyone who asked that he was visiting the territory on personal business, considering investment opportunities. Harrison came to the store several times, always with legitimate ranch business, but also checking on Ophelia's well-being. She found herself watching for him, her heart lifting when she saw his tall figure through the store window. They had coffee together in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about the ranch, about the harsh beauty of the open range. She told him about books she had read, dreams she had once had of opening her own shop. One evening, about 10 days after their first real conversation, Harrison arrived looking troubled. Ophelia knew immediately something was wrong. Edmund has been asking questions around town, Harrison said without preamble, about Nathan, about why an attorney from Kansas is spending so much time in Tulsa, and he has been asking about me, about why I have been coming to the store so often. Ophelia's stomach nodded. Do you think he suspects? I think he knows something is happening, even if he does not know exactly what. Harrison paced the small sitting room. The hearing is in 6 days. Can you hold him off that long? I promised him an answer by Saturday, which was 2 days ago. He came by yesterday demanding to know my decision. Ophelia twisted her hands together. I told him I would announce our engagement at the church social on Sunday. Harrison stopped pacing and stared at her. That is 4 days before the hearing. I know, I had no choice. He was threatening to start eviction proceedings immediately. Ophelia's voice shook. Nathan thinks we can still proceed even if I make the announcement. He said we can argue I was under duress, that Edmund was coercing me. This could get ugly, Harrison said grimly. If Edmund feels publicly humiliated when you back out after the announcement, I know the risks. Ophelia stood and walked to the window, staring out at the darkening street. But what else can I do? I have to make it to the hearing. She felt Harrison come up behind her, close, but not touching. If you need to leave town, get away from Edmund, you tell me immediately. I will take you to the ranch, or wherever you need to go. Running would mean forfeiting everything, Ophelia said softly. Better than being forced into a marriage that would trap you forever. Harrison's voice was low and intense. Better than being hurt. Ophelia turned to face him. They were standing very close, and she could see the concern in his eyes, the way his jaw was tight with worry. Something had shifted between them over the past 2 weeks, something neither of them had acknowledged aloud. But it was there, undeniable, in the way her heart raced when he was near, in the way he looked at her like she was something precious. I will not run, she said firmly, not unless there is no other choice. The church social on Sunday was torture. Ophelia wore her best dress, black but with tasteful gray trim that indicated her mourning period was not entirely over. Edmund arrived early, clearly expecting her to make the announcement. He had even brought a ring, a heavy gold band with small garnets that had belonged to his first wife. The gathering was held in the churchyard, tables laden with food prepared by the townswomen. It was a pleasant June evening, warm, but with a breeze that made the heat bearable. Ophelia stood beside Edmund, feeling like she was moving through a nightmare. She spotted Harrison at the edge of the crowd. He had cleaned up, wearing pressed trousers and a white shirt, his hat held respectfully in his hands. Their eyes met across the yard, and she drew strength from his steady gaze. Edmund cleared his throat loudly, and the conversations around them quieted. Friends and neighbors, he began, his voice carrying. I know these have been difficult weeks for my late brother's widow. Loss is never easy, and we must all support one another in times of grief. Ophelia felt like she might be sick. She saw Nathan creak near the church steps, his expression carefully neutral. However, life must go on, Edmund continued, placing a possessive hand on Ophelia's shoulder. And I am pleased to announce that Mrs. Reeves has done me the honor of agreeing to become my wife. We will marry after a suitable mourning period, and together we will honor Marcus's memory by continuing the success of his mercantile business. There was a smattering of polite applause, but Ophelia noticed many people looked uncomfortable. She forced herself to smile, feeling the weight of the ring as Edmund slipped it onto her finger. It was too large, sliding loosely, and she had to curl her finger to keep it from falling off. Thank you all for your kind wishes, Ophelia managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. The social continued, but Ophelia felt separate from it all, as if she were watching from a great distance. Women came to offer congratulations that felt hollow. Men shook Edmund's hand. Through it all, she was aware of Harrison watching from the periphery, his expression dark. As the evening wound down and shadows lengthened, Ophelia finally managed to slip away from Edmund's side. She walked toward the small cemetery behind the church, needing a moment alone. She had barely reached the iron fence when she heard footsteps behind her. You must feel very satisfied with yourself. Harrison's voice was tight with anger she had not heard from him before. Ophelia spun around. You know I had no choice. There is always a choice. Harrison stepped closer, and she could see the pain in his eyes beneath the anger. You could have refused. You could have come to the ranch. You could have trusted that there was another way. I am trying to save everything I have worked for, Ophelia said, her own frustration rising. You do not understand what it is like to have nothing, to be nothing without a man's name or protection. I do not understand. Harrison's laugh was bitter. I am half Creek in a territory that is systematically stripping my mother's people of their rights and land. I grew up being told I was less than human by white men and not truly Creek by the tribe. So do not tell me I do not understand what it is like to be powerless. They stared at each other, both breathing hard. Then Harrison's expression shifted, the anger draining away to reveal something more vulnerable underneath. "I have been lying to myself," he said quietly, "telling myself I was helping you because it was the right thing to do, because I owed Marcus. But that stopped being true somewhere along the way." Ophelia's heart hammered in her chest. "Harrison, you are the first person in years who has made me feel like I could be more than just a ranch hand drifting from place to place." He took a step closer. "When I am with you, talking to you, I feel like I have found something I did not even know I was searching for." "I am engaged to another man," Ophelia said, but the words felt meaningless even as she spoke them. "An engagement made under duress that you plan to break in 4 days." Harrison reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently took her hand, the one wearing Edmund's ring. "Tell me honestly, Ophelia, is there any part of you that wants that engagement to be real?" "No," she whispered. "I hate everything about it. I hate wearing this ring. I hate standing beside Edmund pretending I am grateful for his proposal when really I want to run as far as I can." "Then run with me," Harrison said softly. "After the hearing, when you have fought for what is rightfully yours, run with me, not away from anything but towards something new. Together." Ophelia looked up at him, at his earnest face and those incredible eyes that saw her so clearly. "You are asking me to choose you when you have known me barely 2 weeks." "I am asking you to choose yourself," Harrison corrected, "to choose freedom and possibility and a life you build rather than one that is handed to you by men who see you as property." He paused. "But yes, I'm also asking you to choose me, to let me stand beside you and build that life together. Not because you need protection or a name, but because we fit together in a way I have never felt before." "I am still wearing another man's ring," Ophelia said, but she did not pull her hand away from his. "Then take it off." Ophelia looked down at the heavy gold band, at the garnets that had belonged to a dead woman. With her free hand she slipped it off and held it out between them. "I cannot throw it away. Not yet. It would tip Edmund off before the hearing." "Give it to me," Harrison said. "I will keep it safe. You can return it to him after the judge makes his ruling." She placed the ring in Harrison's palm, and he closed his fingers around it. Then he lifted her now bare hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was simple, but intimate, and Ophelia felt heat flood through her body. "4 more days," she said. "Can you wait 4 more days for a real answer?" "I will wait as long as you need," Harrison promised, "but I will be there in that courtroom, and Edmund Reeves will know that you are not alone, that you have people standing with you." They walked back to the social together, careful to maintain a proper distance. Edmund was looking for her, his expression annoyed. "Where have you been? It is improper for you to wander off." "I was visiting Marcus's grave," Ophelia said, which was not entirely untrue. "I needed a moment." Edmund's expression softened slightly. "Of course, I understand, but we should be going. People are starting to leave, and I have early business tomorrow." As Ophelia left with Edmund, she glanced back to see Harrison watching her. He touched 2 fingers to his forehead in a small salute, a promise that he would be there when she needed him. The next 3 days were excruciating. Edmund came by the store constantly, talking about plans for the business, for their future. He had already contacted potential buyers for the building, explaining that they would consolidate operations in Kansas City after the marriage. Each conversation made Ophelia's resolve stronger. She would not let him take everything Marcus had built, everything she had helped create. Nathan Creek prepared their case meticulously. He had stacks of depositions, Marcus's journal, business records showing Ophelia's central role in the store's success. He was cautiously optimistic, but warned her repeatedly that the outcome was not certain. "Judge Harrison is fair but conservative," Nathan explained during their final meeting before the hearing. "He respects precedent and established law. We are asking him to interpret the partnership provision in a way that has rarely been done. He may simply decide that the law is clear and rule in Edmund's favor regardless of the moral dimensions. But we have a chance," Ophelia asked. "We have a chance," Nathan confirmed. "A real one." The morning of the hearing, Ophelia dressed carefully in a simple gray dress with black trim. She twisted her hair into a neat bun and pinned on a small black hat. Looking in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. 2 weeks ago, she had been a grieving widow resigned to losing everything. Now she was about to walk into a courtroom and fight. The territorial courthouse was a simple wooden building on the edge of town. Judge Harrison held court there twice a month, handling disputes and legal matters for Tulsa and the surrounding area. When Ophelia arrived with Nathan, she found the courtroom surprisingly full. Townspeople who had given depositions were there. Some of Marcus's old friends, suppliers she had worked with. And in the back row, Harrison York sat with his hat in his lap, his presence a silent support. Edmund sat at the front with his own attorney, a pinched-faced man from Kansas City. When Edmund saw Ophelia, his expression shifted from confident to suspicious. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, approaching her. "Why are you here with an attorney?" "Mr. Reeves," Nathan interceded smoothly, "perhaps we should let the judge explain the proceedings." "What proceedings?" Edmund's voice rose. "This is a probate matter. It was settled weeks ago." Judge Harrison entered then, an older man with steel gray hair and sharp eyes. "Everyone sit down," he ordered briskly. "This court will come to order." As everyone settled, the judge reviewed the papers before him. "This court is convened to hear a challenge to the probate distribution of the estate of Marcus Reeves, deceased. The petitioner is his widow, Ophelia Reeves, represented by attorney Nathan Creek. The respondent is Edmund Reeves, represented by attorney Charles Whitmore. Mr. Creek, you may begin." Nathan stood, and Ophelia felt her heart hammering as he outlined their case. He spoke clearly and persuasively, presenting Marcus's journal entries, the business records, the depositions from townspeople. He argued that Ophelia had been a de facto business partner, that her contributions were essential and documented, and that she deserved partnership rights under territorial law. Edmund's attorney objected repeatedly, arguing that a wife's work in her husband's business was expected and did not constitute legal partnership, that the law was clear about inheritance and blood rights, that allowing this challenge would set a dangerous precedent. The hearing lasted 3 hours. Witnesses were called. The banker testified about Ophelia's management of accounts. A supplier described negotiations he had conducted entirely with her, how she had secured better prices and terms. The town doctor spoke about seeing her at the store at all hours, often handling business while Marcus was ill in the months before his death. Through it all, Ophelia sat rigidly in her chair, barely breathing. Edmund's face grew progressively redder with anger. Several times he leaned over to whisper furiously to his attorney. Finally, Judge Harrison called for a recess. "I will review all materials and testimony. This court will reconvene in 1 hour for my ruling." The hour felt like an eternity. Ophelia could not eat, could not sit still. Harrison found her outside the courthouse, pacing in the dusty street. "You did well in there," he said quietly. "You held yourself together." "I feel like I'm going to shatter into 1,000 pieces," Ophelia admitted. "What if he rules against me? What if all of this was for nothing?" "Then we will figure out what comes next," Harrison said firmly. "Together, if you will have me. You are not alone in this, Ophelia." Edmund stormed past them, not even acknowledging their presence. His fury was palpable, and Ophelia shivered despite the warm day. When they reconvened, the courtroom was even more crowded. Word had spread about the nature of the hearing, and people were curious about the outcome. Judge Harrison took his seat, his expression unreadable. "I have reviewed all evidence and testimony presented," he began. "This is an unusual case, requiring interpretation of territorial law in a manner that has limited precedent. The question before this court is whether Mrs. Ophelia Reeves's contributions to the mercantile business operated by her late husband constitute a legal partnership entitling her to business assets beyond the standard widow's portion." Ophelia held her breath. The law is clear that blood relations take precedence in inheritance of real property and business assets, Hormine, Judge Harrison continued. However, the law also recognizes that legitimate business partnerships exist and that partners have rights to the fruits of their joint labor. The question is whether a wife can be considered a business partner rather than simply a spouse assisting her husband. Edmund leaned forward, his expression eager. After careful consideration of the evidence, particularly the deceased's own written testimony in his journal, I find that Mrs. Reeves was indeed a business partner in the mercantile operation. Judge Harrison's voice was firm. The journal entries clearly indicate that Marcus Reeves viewed his wife as essential to the business's success, that he relied on her judgment and expertise, and that he regretted not formalizing her position. The testimony from numerous witnesses corroborates that Mrs. Reeves operated in a capacity far beyond that of a wife simply assisting her husband. Ophelia felt tears streaming down her face as hope surged through her. Therefore, this court rules that Mrs. Ophelia Reeves is entitled to a 50% partnership share of the mercantile business and its inventory. The building itself remains the property of Edmund Reeves as the blood heir, but he must either purchase Mrs. Reeves's business interest at fair market value or agree to sell the entire operation and split the proceeds equally. Mr. Reeves has 30 days to make this decision and arrange the transaction. The courtroom erupted. Edmund was on his feet, shouting objections. His attorney tried to restore order, calling for an appeal, but Judge Harrison's gavel came down hard. "My ruling stands. This court is adjourned." Ophelia could not move. She sat frozen in her chair, unable to process that she had actually won. Then Nathan was there, gripping her shoulder. "You did it. We did it." "I cannot believe it," she whispered. "I actually have something. I have value." "You always had value," Harrison's voice said from behind her. She turned to find him there, his face lit with a rare, full smile. "The judge just made it legal." Edmund pushed past them, his face twisted with rage. "This is not over," he snarled at Ophelia. "I will appeal to the Territorial Supreme Court. I will fight you at every turn." "That is your right," Nathan said calmly, "but the ruling stands until and unless it is overturned, and I doubt any higher court will disagree with Judge Harrison's interpretation. You should consider accepting the situation and making the best financial arrangement you can." Edmund stormed out, his attorney hurrying after him. The townspeople who had attended crowded around Ophelia, offering congratulations and support. She shook hands and accepted well wishes in a daze, still hardly able to believe what had happened. Finally, the crowd dispersed, and Ophelia found herself standing outside the courthouse with Nathan and Harrison. The afternoon sun was bright, and she blinked against it, feeling like she was seeing the world clearly for the first time in weeks. "What happens now?" she asked Nathan. "Edmund will bluster and threaten, but ultimately he will have to make a decision. My guess is he will choose to buy out your share rather than sell. He wants the building, and purchasing your business interest will be cheaper than dividing sale proceeds." Nathan gathered his papers. "I will stay in town another week to ensure the transaction is handled properly, but Ophelia, you have won. You have secured your future." After Nathan left to arrange his lodgings for the extended stay, Ophelia stood alone with Harrison in the dusty street. People passed by, going about their business. The world felt simultaneously surreal and more real than it had in weeks. "I have something for you," Harrison said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out Edmund's ring. "You should return this yourself. Face him as the victor you are." Ophelia took the ring, looking at it with distaste. "I will return it tomorrow. Today I just want to breathe, to feel what it is like to be free." "Then come with me," Harrison said impulsively. "Come out to the ranch, meet the people I work with, see the place I told you about, get away from town and Edmund and all of this for an evening." Ophelia knew she should refuse. It would not be proper for an unmarried woman to go alone with a man to a remote ranch, but propriety had nearly cost her everything. "Yes," she said, "I would like that very much." They rode out together on Harrison's horse. Ophelia sitting behind him with her arms around his waist. The feel of his solid body against hers, the rhythm of the horse's gait, the endless sky above them, it all made her feel alive in a way she had almost forgotten was possible. The Triple Star Ranch sprawled across several thousand acres of rolling grassland. Cattle grazed in the distance, and Ophelia could see several buildings clustered together, a large main house, a bunkhouse, barns, and corrals. As they approached, a woman emerged from the main house, shading her eyes against the sun. "Harrison York, is that a woman you have brought to my ranch?" she called out with mock severity, but her smile was warm as they dismounted. "Mrs. Morrison, this is Mrs. Ophelia Reeves. Ophelia, this is Catherine Morrison, the ranch owner's wife." Catherine was perhaps 40, with graying blonde hair and kind eyes. She looked Ophelia over with frank assessment. "You are the widow who just won her court case against that horrible brother-in-law. Word has already reached us. Come inside, both of you. You look like you could use a strong cup of coffee and maybe something stronger if you prefer." Inside, the ranch house was comfortable and lived in. Catherine settled them at a large kitchen table and bustled about preparing coffee and slicing fresh bread. Her husband, John Morrison, came in from the barn, a weathered man in his 50s who shook Ophelia's hand with genuine warmth. "Heard what you did in court today," John said. "Took guts to stand up to Edmund Reeves. That man has been trying to buy my land for years, making threats when I refuse. Good to see someone beat him at his own game." They talked for hours, and Ophelia found herself relaxing completely for the first time in weeks. Catherine was forthright and funny, sharing stories about life on the ranch. John was quieter but clearly respected Harrison, speaking of him as more than just a hired hand. It became clear that Harrison had a real home here, people who valued him. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Harrison walked Ophelia outside. They stood on the porch, looking out over the vast expanse of land. "You have a real family here," Ophelia said softly. "I can see why you love this place." "I do love it," Harrison agreed. "But I have been thinking lately that maybe I want more than just ranch work and drifting from season to season." He turned to face her. "You asked me to wait 4 days for a real answer. Well, the 4 days are up. And I'm still asking, Ophelia. Will you choose me? Choose us?" Ophelia's heart felt full to bursting. "I have been alone most of my life, even when I was married. I never thought I would find someone who saw me as more than a means to an end, who valued me for myself." "You still have not answered my question," Harrison said, but he was smiling. "Yes," Ophelia said, and suddenly she was laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I choose you. I choose us. I choose this possibility of something real and true." Harrison pulled her into his arms, and when he kissed her, it felt like coming home, not to a place but to a person, to a sense of rightness she had never experienced before. They stood there as the sun completed its descent, holding each other as the stars began to emerge. When Harrison finally took her back to town, riding slowly through the moonlit landscape, they talked about the future. Ophelia would need to resolve things with Edmund, decide what to do with her share of the business. Harrison wanted her to be certain to not rush into anything because she felt grateful or obligated. "I am not choosing you because I need rescuing," Ophelia told him firmly. "I proved today that I can fight my own battles. I am choosing you because when I imagine my future, you are the person I want beside me. Not in front of me, not behind me, but beside me as an equal partner." "That is all I have ever wanted," Harrison said quietly, "to be seen as an equal, to build something with someone who values partnership." The next morning, Ophelia dressed in her finest dress and walked to the hotel where Edmund was staying. She found him in the lobby, his bags packed. He looked haggard, clearly having slept poorly. "I am returning this," Ophelia said without preamble, holding out the ring. "Our engagement, such as it was, is ended." Edmund's face mottled with anger. "You scheming little witch! You played me for a fool!" "No, you played yourself," Ophelia said calmly. "You saw me as something to acquire, not as a person with rights and dignity. That was your mistake, not mine. I will appeal this ruling," Edmund spat. "I will tie you up in courts for years. You can try, but it will cost you far more in legal fees than my business share is worth." Ophelia set the ring on the table between them. "Mr. Creek informs me you have 30 days to make your decision. I suggest you choose wisely." She turned and walked out, her head high. Behind her, she heard Edmund cursing, but his words had no power over her anymore. She was free. Over the following weeks, the situation resolved itself more quickly than anyone had anticipated. Edmund, faced with the reality of expensive legal battles in a community that supported Ophelia, agreed to purchase her share of the business. Nathan negotiated aggressively, securing a price that reflected not just the inventory but also the goodwill Ophelia had built with customers and suppliers. The sum was enough for Ophelia to purchase a small house on the edge of town with money left over. More importantly, it was enough to give her options, independence, a future of her own making. Harrison courted her properly through the summer of 1881. They rode together on Sundays, attended church socials, shared dinners at the Morrison Ranch. The town watched their courtship with approval, having seen how Harrison had stood by Ophelia during her legal battle. There was no scandal, only a sense that two people who belonged together were finding their way to each other. In September, as the heat finally began to break and the leaves started to turn, Harrison asked Ophelia to marry him properly. They were at their favorite spot by a creek about 5 miles from town, sitting on a blanket and watching the water flow by. "I do not have much to offer," Harrison said, taking her hand. "I am a ranch hand with mixed blood and a complicated past, but I love you with everything I am, and I promise to spend every day earning your trust and building a life worthy of you." "You already are worthy," Ophelia said, tears in her eyes, "and you offer me everything that matters. Partnership, respect, love freely given. That is more than most people ever find." They married in October in a simple ceremony at the church. Catherine Morrison stood up with Ophelia, and one of Harrison's fellow ranch hands served as his witness. Nathan Creek attended, having become a good friend during his extended stay in Tulsa. The town turned out in force, genuinely happy to celebrate a union that felt right to everyone. Edmund had left town weeks earlier, returning to Kansas City. He never did appeal the ruling, and Ophelia heard through occasional gossip that he had sold the mercantile building to a young couple from Texas. She was glad someone would continue the business Marcus had started, even if she was no longer part of it. Ophelia and Harrison built their life together in the small house she had purchased. Harrison continued working at the Triple Star, but they talked about saving to buy their own land someday. Ophelia started a small dressmaking business from home, using skills she had learned as a girl. She was good at it, and word spread quickly about her quality work. Their first year of marriage was full of small joys and challenges, learning each other's habits, building routines, navigating the compromises required of any partnership. There were moments of friction, times when Harrison's restlessness clashed with Ophelia's need for stability, or when her independence frustrated his protective instincts. But they worked through each conflict, always coming back to the foundation of respect and love they had built. In the spring of 1882, Ophelia discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a complex mix of emotions. She had never been sure she wanted children, had never had them with Marcus. But with Harrison, it felt different. It felt like a choice, a conscious decision to bring new life into the world with a partner she truly loved. Their son was born in November 1882, a healthy boy with Harrison's dark hair and Ophelia's green eyes. They named him Marcus John, honoring both Ophelia's late husband and John Morrison. Harrison held his son with trembling hands, tears streaming down his face. "I never thought I would have this," he whispered. "A family, a real family that belongs to me." "We belong to each other," Ophelia corrected gently, looking at her husband and son with fierce love. "All three of us. We built this together." The years that followed were full and rich. Harrison eventually became foreman at the Triple Star, a position of real authority and respect. Ophelia's dressmaking business thrived, and she took on apprentices, teaching young women the trade. They had a daughter in 1885, naming her Catherine Rose after Catherine Morrison and Ophelia's mother. Another son followed in 1888. They did eventually buy land, a modest spread about 20 miles from Tulsa where they raised cattle and horses. Harrison taught his children to ride, to respect the land, to be proud of their Creek heritage. Ophelia taught them to read and figure, to value education and independence. Together they built something solid and lasting, a legacy that was entirely their own. On summer evenings, when the work was done and the children were playing in the yard, Ophelia and Harrison would sit on their porch and watch the sun set over their land. Sometimes they talked about how far they had come, how a chance encounter in a mercantile store had changed both their lives. Other times they simply sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, content in the life they had built together. Years later, when Oklahoma became a state in 1907, their children were grown and starting families of their own. Marcus John had become a lawyer like Nathan Creek, fighting for fair treatment of Native Americans and mixed-blood citizens. Catherine Rose married a rancher and ran one of the most successful horse breeding operations in the state. Their youngest, Samuel, became a teacher, carrying on his parents' belief in the power of education. Ophelia and Harrison grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They had weathered droughts and economic downturns, personal losses and public challenges. Through it all, they remained partners in every sense of the word, two people who had chosen each other freely and built a life based on mutual respect and genuine love. When Harrison's health began to fail in the winter of 1915, he was 71 years old. Ophelia, at 68, sat beside his bed in their home, holding his hand just as she had held it that first evening when he asked her to choose him. "I would do it all again," Harrison said, his voice weak but clear. "Every moment, every struggle, it was all worth it to have this life with you." "We built something good," Ophelia agreed, tears streaming down her face. "Something real and true, and it will continue in our children and grandchildren." "You were the bravest person I ever knew," Harrison said, squeezing her hand with what strength he had left. "Standing up in that courtroom, fighting for what was yours, that is when I knew I loved you. Not when you were vulnerable and needing help, but when you were strong and claiming your own power." "You gave me the means to fight," Ophelia said. "You believed in me when I barely believed in myself. That changed everything." Harrison passed peacefully that night, surrounded by his family. Ophelia mourned him deeply, but she also celebrated the extraordinary life they had shared. She lived another 8 years, dying in her sleep in 1923 at the age of 76. Her last thoughts were of the dusty street in Tulsa where a cowboy had offered her hope, and of all the years of love and partnership that had followed. Their descendants continued to thrive in Oklahoma and beyond. The story of how Ophelia had fought for her rights in court became family legend, passed down through generations as a reminder that the law could be used for justice when wielded by those brave enough to fight. And the love story of how a widow and a cowboy had found each other and built something lasting became a cherished tale, proof that true partnership could overcome any obstacle. The small house they had first shared in Tulsa was eventually torn down, replaced by newer buildings as the town grew into a city. But the land they had bought and worked together remained in the family for generations, a testament to what two people could build when they chose each other as equals, when they fought for their rights, and when they loved without reservation. In the end, Ophelia's victory in that courtroom in 1881 had been about more than money or property. It had been about establishing her right to be seen as a full person, capable of partnership and deserving of legal recognition. And Harrison's love had been about more than romance. It had been about seeing and valuing that personhood, about standing beside her rather than trying to stand in front of her or behind her. Together they had created something that lasted far beyond their own lives. A family built on mutual respect, a legacy of fighting for what was right, and a love story that proved the best relationships were those where both people chose each other freely, with full knowledge of who they were and what they wanted to build together. The law that had nearly trapped Ophelia became, in Harrison's hands and with Nathan Creek's guidance, the very instrument of her freedom. And that freedom had allowed her to choose love on her own terms, to build a life that was fully her own, while sharing it completely with a partner who valued her strength as much as her softness, her independence as much as her commitment. It was, in every sense that mattered, a happy ending. Not because everything was perfect or easy, but because two people had found each other at exactly the right moment, when both were ready to fight for something better and had chosen to build that better life together. The Wild West had been a harsh and unforgiving place in many ways, but it had also been a place where new things were possible, where the old rules could sometimes be bent or broken, where courage and determination could forge new paths. Ophelia and Harrison had walked one of those new paths together hand in hand, creating a love story that their descendants would remember and celebrate for generations to come. And in doing so, they proved that even in the hardest of circumstances, even when the law seemed weighted against the powerless, there could be hope, there could be justice, and there could be love that transformed everything it touched.